Ultimate Masters had given us more options than any other Yu-Gi-Oh game in terms of cards to choose from. However, that doesn't mean they had every single one of them. Sometimes you might have noticed this if you were looking for a card that you had a set 100% completed in and it just wasn't there, or if you entered the password, it would just give you an error code. This is because quite a few cards didn't make it into virtual form for one reason or another. And while there are too many to go over individually, I'm going over the best and most relevant cards missing in the game. A distinct group of cards that didn't make it into GBA form are cards that name names. I think we can safely say it was probably too technically ambitious to make work in a quality manner. That means we lost some pretty decent cards like Mind Crush, DD Designator, and Archfiend's Oath, all having their places in these retro formats. Less competitively relevant, there is an absence of cards that manipulate the top of the library. Things like Big Eye, Spellbook of Organization, and Fruits of Kozaki would have been cool but aren't really deal breakers for me. Then there's other cards that basically have really weird effects that would have been hard to deal with in development from a technical standpoint. Things like Pole Position, Rivalry of Warlords, and Darkness Approaches could probably technically be accomplished, but are just sort of out there. But surprisingly, many of the missing cards don't fall into any of these categories, and should be easily technically possible based on the cards in the game with similar effects. And to start us off, I'll go with one that tugs at the heartstrings, and that is Classic Waifu Pixie Knight. This card still has a decent presence in retro formats where spell cards are extremely powerful, and she makes for a toolbox spell strategy which can easily establish card advantage by recycling the classic overpowered spells that were legal at the time. A powerful tech card missing in this game is My Body as a Shield, and it's typically used to protect your board investments as it can negate both singular and sweeper effects that would destroy your monsters at the cost of 1500 life points. It works very well in aggro decks that aim to get really wide, or in lockdown or combo decks as a way to protect its boss monster, something big like a Dark Paladin or Horse level 8. You will see this card in side decks every once in a while, or even in some main decks, so it's definitely something to keep in mind when you're theory crafting decks for this game. We're also noticeably missing Gravekeeper's Chief. It's not widely competitively used in modern meta Gravekeeper's decks, but he's certainly a viable boss monster and is a staple of the archetype for sure. Along with the Chief, both the Watcher and the Vassal didn't make the final cut of the game for possibly being too technical or not being perceived as relevant enough. But on a positive note, we got all of the really good Gravekeepers, and the archetype remains fairly strong in this game. Another insane tech card that didn't make the cut is Royal Oppression. This card can actually be used by you or your opponent once it's activated, and would allow either player to pay 800 life points to negate the activation of a special summon. In the right circumstances, this card can really shut down some decks, and if you build your deck around it, or sideboard properly for its effect, it can basically be a really good one-sided effect for your opponent. Secret Pass to the Treasures was an interesting card that lets a weak monster get through for a direct hit that turn, and it's definitely not a very competitive card, but it's a really fun combo tool, or a tool that can set up things like a Hayabusa Knight before it's pumped, a White Magical Hat, maybe Mine the Thorn or Chick the Yellow, or even something like a Spirit Ryu for a janky Heart of the Underdog combo deck. There's so many cool options for this card, and it would have been really nice to see this one in Ultimate Masters for sure. Next, we have one for the scumbags who would actually use these cards. Stall decks, or decks that rely on back row cards in general, won't have access to Fake Trap or Magic Reflector in this game. Fake Trap can save face-up or face-down trap cards from pretty much anything on the spot, and it's typically used to protect the many continuous stall effects, while Magic Reflector can only protect one face-up spell card from being destroyed one time in the future. This can be useful in strategies that rely on field spells like Necro Valley and Pandemonium, or in decks that want to protect their continuous spells like Wave Motion Cannon or Toon World. This mostly impacts stall decks, but overall greatly reduces the number of viable back row protection cards, because pretty much Judgment of Anubis can only negate spells, which means you're better off using Magic Drain or Curse Seal of the Forbidden Spell, and at that point, you're pretty much better off using Solemn Judgment in every situation if you're not already playing it. But even though the stall and burn decks took a bit of a hit, we also lost the two best anti-burn cards at the time, Barrel Behind the Door and Trap of Border Racer, both being counter traps that can be activated if you are going to receive effect damage and preventing it. Barrel Behind the Door will send that damage back to your opponent, while Trap of Border Racer makes them discard a card of their choice. I can't imagine why these were left out, maybe because they couldn't determine battle versus effect damage. Seeing that the game doesn't even detect Jowgen wins correctly, it always gives you an effect damage only bonus, even though you don't deal any damage through the effect of winning with last turn, so that is a little strange. Now I have some honorable mentions that might be a little bit less impactful, but I felt like mentioning. The first being Kaiser Coliseum, another stall effect that more or less locks down your opponent to the same amount of monsters as you control as long as you have one. This card is actually banned in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it shuts down so many strategies, and while it isn't as crazy powerful during this time, as you can imagine, this with a Big Shield Gardna would be pretty annoying to fight through. Then we have a little bit of a mystery as to why they took the time to code Parasite. Parasite's ability to remain face up in the deck and trigger an effect upon drawing it, but deciding to leave out Graveler and Pharaoh's Treasure, which use sort of the same mechanic, but to be honest, I don't really miss these at all. Lastly, I thought it was a little strange that Sealmaster Messi is in the game, but both his talismans are gone, and that pretty much makes him unusable, and honestly, I just felt the need to complain about it to someone. And if you feel the need to complain about something about this game, be sure to leave it in the comments. Maybe we will send a petition to Konami or something, I don't know. But in the meantime, take a snooze on my proverbial couch to be ready for the next time that we bask in the yellow glory of Ultimate Masters 2006. You will pay for what you did to Pixie Knight, you cowards.